My name's Malia. If we haven't met before, I teach at Just Be Yoga. The owner of Just Be Yoga is on this call as well, Jenny.
Hi, everyone.
And we are so grateful that all of you took the time this morning to come and hear from two teachers that mean so much to us at Just Be Yoga. And we are so grateful that Lama Brandy and Father Dr. Brian Baker have donated their very precious time this morning to give us some comfort during this difficult time. Both Brandy and Brian have been teaching at our teacher trainings for the past 6 years. They're going to introduce themselves, but I know that neither one of them will brag about themselves. They'll both be very humble. I know this over the course of 6 years, so I'm just going to say a little bit about the two of them. They've both been practicing yoga for way over 20 years. Brian started meditating in the 7th grade. Which was like, what, 5 years ago, Brian? And Brandy's been practicing for 28 years. They have been friends for about 12 years. And Brandy has always taught us Buddhist philosophy in regards to the yoga practice in a very accessible way. She's a social worker. She does restorative justice and works with incarcerated populations. Brian has given an amazing TED Talk. He's facilitated an interfaith conversation with the Dalai Lama. Just both wonderful human beings. Thank you so much for being here. Brandy, if you don't mind introducing anything about yourself that I left out that you wanted people to know.
No, you covered more than I was going to cover. So I'm really grateful to be here, and I hope right now everybody is on full screen and can see everyone. And, I personally find this really awkward, but probably like you, we're all getting used to this kind of being on the screen and being seen. And, but if we could just kind of scan and look at each other and really realize that if we're all sitting in a circle together right now, kind of seeing each other and, having our mirror neurons activated by our like fellow human beings, for me, a familiar feeling is coming up because I've got to do this in circles at Just Be so many times, and it feels really beautiful. So I'm just hoping we're all finding our way to that place together. I don't have anything else to add, just that it's a huge privilege to be here, and the community that you guys are creating and building, it always just really, I don't know, my heart just feels inspired and gladdened by being part of what you all have going on. So that's all. Reverend.
So I just wanted to say that I've been a priest for almost 30 years, and I've been involved in yoga and Buddhism for over 20 years now. And my church work is sort of at the tail end. I'm doing less and less in running churches and more getting more connected with the yoga world. And I also have a thing going that has dominated a big part of my life, which is a religious camp at Burning Man that I run, and I've been going for 5 years. And so as I look at my next vocation, Burning Man is going to be a big part of that, as well as doing more of this. And I'm really enjoying seeing some familiar faces from past teacher trainings. Thank you all for being here, and I'm grateful. Recently, my wife and I moved to Kentucky. She got transferred. She's a chaplain in the Army and got transferred to Fort Knox. And I was heartbroken to leave all of my California yoga connections. And thankfully, in the new world we're in, once I realized the yoga teachers were doing all their teaching via Zoom, it didn't matter anymore that I was in Kentucky. And I can be with you just as if I was in California. So I'm grateful for this opportunity to be together.
So our idea for the rest of our 55 minutes together is Reverend has a really beautiful presentation that we've kind of been working on. So he'll present a little bit, and then we'll have a moment of kind of contemplation and some meditation. And then he'll present a little bit more. And then we've last minute, late last night, we asked the Just Be staff if we could do breakout groups, and they all said, we'll figure it out. So we're hoping, and no pressure, we'll figure it out if it doesn't happen, that then we can have a little bit of discussion and conversation about what we talk about, so that each one of you, and it's an important part of this process, is that each one of your voices is heard and kind of gets to engage and be seen and all of that. So, so we'll do that at the end, and then we'll have some question and answer stuff. So that said, if you came on later, if you could have something to write with nearby, even just a Post-it note and a pencil, it doesn't matter, have something like that. And then kind of as we go, also in the chat, if questions come up, there'll be a time at the end, and one of our moderators, probably Malia or somebody, will be, and maybe Jenny will be checking it out, and then they'll relay kind of some questions to us at the end for that opportunity too. So that's it. That's what we're here to do. Thanks all of you for being here.
So my son is a senior at West Point, and he left on spring break. And while he was away on spring break, he left on spring break thinking everything was normal. And while he was away on spring break, he got word that he wasn't going to be going back, and that his West Point experience was over, and that he wasn't going to have the opportunity to be with his classmates through those last few months and celebrate all that they'd accomplished. Probably wasn't going to have a graduation ceremony. And my wife and I are, not able to go see his graduation and celebrate that milestone. And because she and I are both graduates, that place and that ceremony and this event holds a particular place in our lives, and that's not going to be happening. And we're really sad. A big part of my life, as I said in the introduction, is Burning Man. And for 5 years, my vocation has been shifting to creating spiritual community among burners and creating this camp called Religious as Fuck at Burning Man. And it has become a part of my life, not just during the 10 days of the burn, but all year round, preparing for it and building community and creating it. And we just found out that Burning Man is canceled. And Burning Man is in dire financial straits because of that, because it's their only income. And we don't know the future of Burning Man. And around that, I have a lot of grief, and I'm really, really sad. I don't have my son's graduation. He doesn't get to have his graduation. My whole Burning Man world is gone. And those are just two of the things that I'm grieving as an individual. I bring that up because as we talk about what's happening in our world and in our culture and in our lives, sort of honoring our grief and our sadness is an important part of that. And I know that, like, my grief is tiny compared to the grief that a lot of other people are facing right now. But I was listening to an interview of David Kessler with Brene Brown. And David Kessler is the guy who wrote the book on grief. He partnered with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross on the phases of dying, and he took that work and put it into the phases of grief. And Brene Brown was interviewing him, and he said in this interview, he said, when I published this book on grief, right around that time, my son died. And people would come up to me and say, well, my grief can't compare. And David's response was, the most important loss is your loss. The most important loss is the one that you're going through right now. And that there's no value in comparing whether or not your loss is big, in comparison to someone else who might have lost a friend or lost a job or whatever. Your loss is the important loss. And that loss comes with grief and sadness and heartache. And if you can imagine, like, everyone has lost something. which means everyone, like everyone in our community, everyone in our country, practically everyone on the planet is experiencing loss. The level of trauma around this, and trauma that is unacknowledged or unhonored or dismissed, is profound. And one phase, one step, one way of dealing with this is to be honest, to acknowledge, to lament the loss and the grief that we're in. And also maybe to use that fact to inform us treating one another gently, because we're all struggling. Now, one of the things I want to do is present a model. I want to present a model for us to understand what's going on and what we're going through. And then we're going to take a break to you can reflect on what you're going through. And then I want to talk about some ways of dealing with what we're going through. And if you think about what we're going through, I mean, we've got traumatic loss. We've also got this massive disruption of our daily life. I mean, we're all at home, living our lives in our houses. And then there's this profound uncertainty about our future. We have no idea how long this is going to last. We have no idea. Like if we're in this situation for a year because we don't have a vaccine, I mean, we have no idea. We don't know. It's profoundly disruptive. And I want to introduce to you one way of looking at this is we're in the middle of a transition. We're in the middle of some kind of shift or some kind of change in the way we do things. And I want to introduce to you a model of transition just to help us put a framework and have a framework and sort of put a picture to what we're going through. And I'm going to share my screen and show this beautiful graphic. So this model was created by a guy named William Bridges, and he was trying to help businesses deal with change. And he makes a distinction between change and transition. Change is something that happens externally. You know, there's a change, like a pandemic, and here we are in our houses. That's a change. A transition is what happens in your soul. Like you can go through a change and it can be jarring and disruptive, or you can go through a change and it can be generative and beautiful. And the reason he created this model and wrote this book, and I'll hold the book up when I'm done sharing the screen so you can see, was to help businesses. Because what businesses were discovering was they would introduce a change. They would come up with a great idea, a new way for businesses to relate. They would introduce this change. And for them, it was just sort of a technical matter of here's the new manual. We'll give you, extra money if you do this well. They implement this change, but there wasn't the work to shift the soul of the people and the soul of the organization and to prepare them for it. And the changes weren't working. People got depressed, they weren't able to do it, they fell back into old ways, et cetera, et cetera. So David Bridges created this model to help people understand that transition is a process and there are phases in the process. So I want to talk you through the phases. The first phase is the ending, the losing, the letting go, that in any change, people lose stuff. You lose something in a transition. And part of this process is to honor what is being lost, being honest and upfront about it. The second phase is that in-between phase of change, where you've let go of the old way of being, but the new way of being hasn't really landed. And then the third phase is the new thing being there. Now, I want to point out 3 things that are helpful about this model, and then we'll talk about our own particular situation. The first thing that's helpful about this model is that first phase of loss. We don't do a good job culturally when a change happens of acknowledging the loss. You know, if you move from one town to another, there's all the excitement, you know, and you tell your kids how great the new school's going to be, but we don't do a great job of mourning and grieving and putting systems in place for us to really name what we're losing. So just for, you know, from a business perspective, they were putting out the new SOP and incentivizing people adopting it, but never really took the time. And you can see that in a business setting of not really taking the time of celebrating what they, you know, what we had and how great it was, and honoring what people were losing and acknowledging that. So one aha of this model is just that there's a cost in change. And if you want to do it well, you need to honor what you're losing. The second thing that I think is lovely about this model is the phases aren't discrete. Like, you don't say goodbye and then you're in the in-between and then the new comes, right? There's this overlapping. And if you look at this if we use like a moving from one town to another example, even while you're saying goodbye, there's a little piece of you that might be excited about the new thing that's coming. And even when you're in your new thing, that doesn't mean the sadness and grief and loss is completely gone. There's that still part of you that's yearning to be back with your buddies at Just Be Yoga or in Sacramento. There's that part of you that's, you know, that's wanting to hold on. So the second part that's helpful about this model is it's not clean cut and the phases overlap. So we're a mix of emotions when we're going through this. And then the third thing that is helpful in this model is that whole notion of the neutral zone. Because people, when they would map out change, it's this is where we were and now we're going to do this. And there wasn't this sense of, in the middle of one thing and the next, there's this phase in our hearts and our souls where we're just sort of dislocated and wandering and unmoored, and we're both vulnerable but also creative, and that there's this whole thing in there that people weren't paying any attention to. And that thing in there that people weren't paying any attention to is exactly where we are right now, which is what makes David Bridges' work sort of really helpful for right now, because where we are as a country and as a people is the neutral zone. You know, we've lost some things and we have no clue what the new thing is, and we're in this middle, messy place. Spiritually, in my tradition, we would call that the wilderness. And we're in the wilderness, and from the biblical story, you know, we've left Egypt, and we know there's something we're heading toward, but we don't know what it is. And in the biblical story of the wilderness in Exodus, it was this 40-year sort of challenging, ambiguous, messy, vague place they were in. And that's where we are right now. Now, I want to talk, let me stop sharing this so I can see everyone. I want to talk a little bit about where we are. One is that, as I mentioned in the beginning, each one of us is suffering with loss. There's something that we aren't going to get to do that we used to do, or there's something really important to us that isn't going to come back, or we don't get to have now. I mean, everyone is dealing with the loss and the grief. Another thing that we're dealing with is this complete disruption of our normal lives. Our normal patterns of living, our normal patterns of being are completely disrupted. Now, one of the things that it's helpful to notice is that our normal patterns of being had built in helpful buffers that could help sort of buffer maybe some things that are real in our lives. Like none of us are really dealing 100% with what's really real in our lives, and we don't want to deal with what's really real in our lives because it's overwhelming. So we have these buffers, so you actually leave your family for periods of time before you come back. Or you have this stuff so that you're not dealing, or you have so much busyness in your life that you don't have to listen to the thoughts in your head. And now we're at home with the thoughts in our head, or we're at home with our family members, and we're being faced with some things that are just challenging. And we don't have our normal pattern of being able to do things that help create the variety and the openness and the space for play, perhaps, to help us deal with some things in our lives. So this can become really stressful. So not only are we dealing with loss, but we're losing the patterns in our lives that helps give us a break. And also we're confronted, if there are cracks in your system, the cracks in your system become more obvious when you don't have your buffers. So you begin to see, your own thoughts or your relationships with people, and you can see cracks in the system, and that creates all kinds of stress, and we don't have the normal things in our life to provide a break from that. On top of that, we have no freaking idea where we're going and when this is going to end. We hear hopeful things, and we can be hopeful, but we don't know. And which adds a whole other layer of stress. We don't know if our jobs are going to survive. We don't know if our economy is going to be in place. We don't know any of that. So we are in this place right now, this neutral zone of vagueness and anxiety, which can lead into some emotional responses. And I want to talk about the emotional responses. What I'm trying to do here is just stir up the pot, help us name some things. And there are other things that I'm not thinking of, I'm not naming. And then we can talk about how we want to address some of these. So emotional responses that we may be going through right now. One is sadness. I'm really sad. And there are parts of me that know things I'm sad about. Like I'm sad about my son's graduation. I'm sad about Burning Man. But there's also this sort of general sadness. Like I'm sad about things I don't even know I'm sad about. But I know like shit's falling apart. And I'm just sad. Another thing is I'm afraid. So fear, the unknown, this unknown future is a fear playground. The parts of our brain that likes to catastrophize can just go crazy now and think about all the horrible things that are going to happen in our world. So there's sadness and there's fear. There's also acedia, which is it's like spiritual worn outness. You just run down and tired, and you don't want to get off the couch. Acedia is the spiritual piece that's behind sloth. It's behind the thing that you just can't, like you've run out of fucks to give, and you just can't get up. And you're just watching Netflix or scrolling on your phone. It's this malaise that's a result of being overwhelmed and scared and afraid, and you just can't anymore. And then another component is judginess. Judginess of yourself because you just can't anymore. And you really should be a whole lot more productive because you have all this time on your hand. What's wrong with you? Judginess of other people because we're acting out of fear. And we don't have the capacity to give people the benefit of the doubt because we're worn down and exhausted and afraid. And those are the things, right, that are coming up, that can come up inside of us that push ourselves into our smaller selves. And if we stay in those places, if we allow those feelings to rule us, then it can really have a negative effect on who we are and the other end of this transition. And part of what we want to talk about after this little break piece we're going to do is what we can do to mitigate our sadness and our fear and our judgment and our slothiness, how we can move into our better selves so that we can be creative and productive, and this period can be a period of life-giving. But right now I want to stay with our sadness and fear and judgment and acedia and turn it over to Brandy.
Thanks, Reverend. So kind of along those lines, you know, yoga, our yoga practice, there was an interview with Sean Corn, a lot of you might know, she's, you know, famous yogi, a while ago that I heard, and she just in passing, she said, I practiced a regular yoga practice for 5 years before I had an emotional experience. And that really struck me because she's known for this work with like how our kind of undigested, unprocessed emotions live in our bodies, how they get lodged down in their own places. So for me, and I think a lot of us living in a disembodied culture, the yoga practice brings us into our own body, into our own lived, felt experience of what it is to be human and actually who we are. And kind of to that first piece of the graph that Reverend showed us, that part in green, you know, right now we're in this, maybe we're in this middle spot, but we're also, you know, really impacted heavily by our own losses. And, you know, what we're learning about everything around trauma and the whole process of healing is we especially in yoga, because we're in this practice because we've had some kind of blissful opening experience. And like all good addicts, which we are on this plane of existence, when we taste something really juicy, we want more of it. And that's actually a beautiful thing. Like that's really a really beautiful thing. It's an important part of us. But sometimes we want to get there really quickly, and we don't want to go, I don't want to go through all the other stuff that hurts and feels icky and is kind of painful. So we hear about things like forgiveness and being in the bliss, and, you know, change is this beautiful possibility, and all this kind of stuff. And there's this, in me, there's this really, I don't know how to process the big uncomfortable stuff that kind of is welling up. So I'm going to shift my attention and my gaze kind of forward to that thing that I want to move into. And we kind of, I think we've been learning for a really long time now in a lot of ways that that's not how we grow and heal. When we try to do that, we end up going around it, and it ends up coming back in some kind of other way later on. So, so I want to invite us right now to just maybe just right away, just take your pen and your paper, and just to what Reverend was speaking of, write down at least three losses that you personally are experiencing. And then around those losses, kind of what emotions are there? When you think of them or write that down, what emotions come up? And please write those down as well. And then maybe start to notice kind of where you feel this in your body. You know, maybe you feel it in your throat or your chest, your hands, belly. And kind of you can stay in this personal reflective space of really just giving kind of your time and your attention to what's happening inside of you. And if some of you or all of you would like to share any of that in the chat, any of the losses, any of the things that you're letting go of that are being kind of taken right now, any of the emotions that come up around it. And then also if there's any kind of strong sensation in your body. Loss of my typical daily routine, I'm feeling shame because I was so ingrained in it. Tense shoulders, thank you. Loss of freedom, connection, loss of help with the kids. This brings up fear and panic, loneliness, that stomach gut sensation. Loss of income, livelihood, the feel of fear of the future.
It's not working.
Loss of physical touch, increased tension in my body, disconnectedness. My nephew had a baby 2 months ago and I haven't been able to hold that baby or see him. Loss of the mothering I want to do, feel it in my heart, right? That time goes. We don't, that time of the infant, newborn baby, it doesn't stay, right? It's going by too fast for me to even read it. Malia, will you join in, or Jenny, will you start reading some of these?
I'm writing about my losses and the emotions I'm experiencing. Because of them, I can feel my heart rate increasing, feeling it in my chest and my stomach. Loss of income, feeling afraid, and I feel it in my heart. Loss of personal connection with people and communities that I love. Loss of connection, loss of social growth. Collective loss, homelessness, 22 million unemployed, third world hunger, personal loss of clients, financial stability, work, my parents' health, aunt's health, my professor's health. I feel sad, heavy. Where do I feel it? In my belly.
So let's, this is great. Can I invite everybody, Malia, this is perfect. Can everybody, while Malia's reading, because this is big, you know, and while she's reading, continue for a minute, but let's do, I want to invite us to kind of take all this in with a self-compassion practice. And this is what we do when we sit in circles inside of prison, is please put one hand on your belly, and I mean on your chest, and sometimes mine kind of ekes up to my throat because I tend to feel a lot of my stuff up in my throat. And then the other hand kind of solar plexus belly, and really just kind of press into yourself and let your body be really held by whatever you're sitting on, and your heart be really present. And you can close your eyes down and or keep them open, and let yourself breathe. Just like we do in our yoga practice, come back to your breath again and again. And if the kind of sharpness and the tightness gets big, come back to your breath. And if it starts to also get big, you can also open your eyes and look at this other screen of people, because there's this, one of the first one I read mentioned shame. And the piece about shame is that shame isolates us. And shame makes me feel like I'm doing something wrong and somehow creating this. And the fact is, I'm imagining that every one of these that we hear, it resonates with each one of us in some way or another. So we're together. This is globally part of our shared experience right now. Okay, so with breath and togetherness. Malia, will you keep reading?
Loss of connection with my mom and freedom, sadness, grief, frustration, and fear, chest and gut. Loss of endings. My child's final months at co-op preschool, where we have made most of our family and friends here. Fear of when I will see my family again who live in the United Kingdom. Fear for their safety. Lost the ability to travel to see our family vacation home of over 50 years before it is being transferred to new owners. Makes my heart hurt and makes me miss my family. Loss of daily schedule, touch points, loss of physical touch, interaction with friends, loss of freedom to leave the house. Feel it in my chest and my stomach. My emotions range from fear, anger, sadness, and shame. Daughter's 8th grade promotion, hugging, missed teaching and seeing students, sad about a Bali retreat that was canceled, solar plexus, belly, eyes heavy. Fear for fellow healthcare workers. Loss of job and income. Fear of being able to support myself. Anger of time and energy wasted. Feeling it in my heart, head, and back for lack of support.
Let's do just one more.
Physical touch and day-to-day partner. Loss of marriage, sadness, feeling ache in heart.
All right. I don't know about you guys, but the kind of internal pressure just gets so huge, right? And so we've got our breath. We've got tears. Tears are one of the ways that we were given, we were designed. It's a way for us to really mourn and feel sadness. And we've got these little boxes on the screen in front of us, which are the windows into all these other lives. And the thing is that we're not doing it alone. And these are also, I feel, for me, they've been really important times to kind of start calling on that which is bigger, spirit, and however I name that and however I want to call that. And if there's no picture and there's no word that comes to you, it doesn't matter, but it's calling on it. That there's these circles of us that we're seeing right here together, and then each one of us represents so many other people in our lives. So many other kind of ancestors, people that are no longer living, but are giving us the gifts and the curses of their own human process. The people, the future generations that are coming, and that which is sacred and kind of holds all of us, right? So feel the warmth in your hands, and then if you're comfortable with it, you can close your eyes down and really just start to feel that warmth. And let that sense of touch really just convey kind of a tenderness and care. as though you were hugging and holding not only your own heart, your own tight, aching places in your body, but also that of everyone else, all those that were just named. And so much more, right? Maybe if we can allow that kind of that care, that tenderness in through our touch. Maybe we can even use some soothing words. Just let what comes come, as though you were picking up a crying 2-year-old. It's just distraught and despairing and is pretty sure that it's never going to be okay again. As though you were holding and hugging that 2-year-old. Maybe you rock a little bit, maybe you croon a little bit. Touch their back, their heart, the back, and you say, it's going to be okay. I got you. And importantly, it's okay to feel everything we're feeling right now. It's okay to feel this. This too belongs here. This too is part of this whole. If resistance comes up and kind of a hardening, pushing away, a storyline, that's okay, that's here too. And I invite you to either, you can keep your hand on your body, it can be really soothing. You can keep your eyes closed if you wish, or you can start to open them. There's more to do here. And while we don't want to turn away from everything that's in our body right now and kind of been stirred up, so we can see if we can kind of open, and we'll engage with this next piece with this kind of tender presencing and awareness to what is right here. That's the invitation.
Thank you, Brandy. So these feelings, I mean, what we're going through is real and big and huge, and it's not going to go away. And what we want to do is present some ideas. So these feelings, right? This loss and this grief and this pain and this fear, it's real and it's not going to go away, but it doesn't have to own us. And it doesn't have to define us. And it doesn't have to rule our future. It doesn't mean it's going to go away. It's not going to go away. But it doesn't have to own us. And we're not powerless in the face of all of this overwhelming shit. We're not powerless. And part of the way of moving through is to do what we just did. And that is, in solidarity and love with one another, to speak the truth about how hard this is and how scary this is. And one of the things that we can do, one of the things we must do, is to honor this, to honor the grief, to honor our pain, to name it. Different religious traditions have different superpowers. And like yoga, what's missing in my tradition I found in yoga, which is a very physical practice. What's present in my tradition and present in Judaism is this whole spiritual world of lament, of crying out in heartache and heartbreak, sort of railing at God, saying, fuck you, like, why is this happening? This is horrible. We're dying here and this is broken and it's not okay. And for that speech, that language to be holy speech, right? It's not sacrilegious, it's holy. Because we're naming and honoring sort of the brokenness and the brokenheartedness and the messiness and the bloodiness that happen, that's like real on a global scale, and it's real on the scale of our own individual lives and hearts. What we're going to do is talk about some of these different things. Like, one thing is lament. One thing is doing what Brandy just did with us, which is honoring it. And I want to talk about fear, and I want to talk about judgment. I want to talk about each of these things. And each of these things, which we're going to spend a grand total of 2.5 minutes on, each of these things like needs a whole thing. And we can do a whole thing. We can come back and do more and more and more of this. This was just our first thought of just coming and naming these things. And Brandy just showed us the value of focusing on one of these and holding it up. So one is to do what Brandy did with us and honor the loss. And for us to just name it and be present with each other and love one another in the midst of our heartache and grief. I want to move now and talk about fear. We have real things to be afraid of. But the problem with the way our brains work is we take real things to be afraid of, and we create monsters out of them that paralyze us. We overestimate the likelihood that the bad is going to happen, and we catastrophize what that bad's going to look like. And fear is really, it's a fiction. It's a story that we tell ourselves. We take a present circumstance, we're in a pandemic, and then we project out into the future the worst thing we could think is going to happen. And then we live our lives right now as if that is real. When then all that is a projection, where we overestimate and we catastrophize. And the other thing we do with fear is we underestimate our capacity of dealing with the shit. Like, even if the shit happens as bad as we're afraid of, we're going to be okay because we're awesome. And we underestimate our capacity to make it through whatever the horrible thing is that we're afraid of. And if you think about when you've gone through in your life, when you've gone through horrible things, in the moment, you're okay, like you're making it. What paralyzes you is thinking how bad it's going to be in the future. But we can handle, we have resources within ourselves that will surprise us when the bad thing happens. The other thing to keep in mind when we're thinking about fear in this world of fear is this other strategy is to cultivate hope, is to realize that you're not alone. And not only are you partnered with people in your lives, but there is a power and a force in the universe that is conspiring to bring us to wholeness, that creates life out of things that appear like us to be death. And one way to cultivate hope is to hold in memory those experiences that give warrant to hope. Like, hold in memory. Remember those times when you had to go through something that was horrible and you made it and you weren't alone and on the other side of the horrible thing. And this is what I believe from my tradition is on the other side of every horrible thing is a new beginning that is not a repeat of the old, but is something new and spectacular that is created out of all of the broken pieces from what came before. So you can cultivate faith, cultivate hope that, you know, it's hard and painful and this sucks, but there's a good chance that there's going to be something on the other side of this. Something else, and I want to bring in the Bridges model to talk about this next thing, is the neutral zone is the place of creativity. The neutral zone is the only real place change can happen. It is so hard to change your life when you're going through your life. When you're in ordinary time, you know, you're doing the stuff on the list, and then you do the stuff on the list, and then you do the stuff on the list day after day after day. You can't change. But when everything is ripped up and torn up and you're in a whole new world, that's when change happens. So we're in this point. You have this point in your life right now, this window of opportunity for change. That may be the biggest window of opportunity for change you have ever in your life. Where the status quo is totally ripped up. And there's the possibility of reinventing and doing things new. And us doing this on Zoom, doing things new, and partnering with people, and coming up with new creative ways of being human that we never would have dreamed of or imagined. And this Zoom technology has been around all along. I was heartbroken to leave California, move to Kentucky, because I'm never going to partner with my Just Be friends again. And here we are. And this maybe can continue after the pandemic is over, maybe. But this time of disruption is a time for us, this window of opportunity to change. And there are a couple of things, and I mean, we can think, we don't have time, like this is another example of something that we could brainstorm for a whole nother session, but one is, during this time, emergent things are coming up that are working, like this Zoom call. So think about, how can we create the things that we're learning how to do now? How does that help our lives after pandemic? And the other is to use the disruption in your life to develop new patterns. I am not commuting. I'm not running errands. I am not doing hardly anything on my to-do list that I used to do. I have all this time in my day that I didn't used to do, which means I have run out of excuses to not do the stuff. Now, I've been meditating. I learned to meditate 45 years ago when I was 12 years old. And ever since then, for 45 years, I've had this yearning to meditate twice a day. For 20 minutes, because I knew that's what I needed to do. Twice a day, 20 minutes. Boom. Everyone says it, that's what I should do. I've tried it at times, but it never works because I'm always doing my to-do list. And now for 2 weeks, I've had time, and for 2 weeks, for the first time in my life after trying for 45 years, I'm meditating twice a day. Now, given how long this pandemic is going to last, I may cultivate a new habit that was made possible because of the shitstorm we're in. So now is a time for you to realize that in the midst of the sadness, in the midst of the fear, there's also this opportunity. Or for us to realize and be honest about the cracks that are appearing in our lives, and maybe we need to pay attention to those and have the hard conversations. Because what we were putting up with during ordinary time, we don't want to put up with anymore. Maybe that's what we're learning. But to see this as a time of opportunity. Then the next thing I want to mention is to be gentle on yourself. To lighten the fuck up. And to not be so hard on yourself if you're not meditating twice a day. You're not cultivating new habits. You're not doing anything but just sitting on your sofa and, trying to pick your next Netflix show. to just realize that now is a time for us to be really gentle with one another. And there may be a season when you have creative energy, but now may not be that season. And to give other people the benefit of the doubt, because everyone's scared and everyone's trying the best they can. And then finally, if you have the energy, do something purposeful. Like call your friends and see if they want to do a Zoom class with you at Just Be Yoga. Or find something, right? Something you can do. But doing this class, like, you know, Brandy and I getting together with Malia and doing this class has been a balm for us to feel generative and alive in this time of fear and anxiety. So this is a really, 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 really painful, shitty, scary time, but the pain and the fear don't have to own us. But if they're not going to own us, we need to be honest. We need to acknowledge the pain. We needed to work through the fear. We need to hold on to each other for dear life and make connections so we know we're not alone. And maybe we can see this as an opportunity, as a time of change, and maybe even generativity. But through it all, we've got to be gentle and loving and keep our hearts supple. This, Anne Lamott likes to say that if it feels like a bad ending, it's not the end, right? This is not the end. This is just a time we're going through, and we're not the first people on the planet to go through a hard time. This is just our hard time. And on the other side of it, there's going to be new life. It's just a matter of, it's a question of who we are going to be as we move toward that new life. And I don't know what time we have. I don't know. Yeah.
Can you, can everyone just pause for a minute and let your energy settle back inside yourself, and then write down just what's calling to come through. We're in this liminal space, right? The caterpillar gone into the chrysalis and being absorbed and dissolved. And we will reemerge as the butterfly. And what's calling? So write down that. Maybe it's one word, maybe it's two, maybe it's three, maybe it's a sentence. And if you'd like, you can type it into the thing. We won't take that long, but I'd love to read a couple. Type it into the chat. Immense gratitude, presence, productivity, and peace. I love caterpillars and butterflies, me too. Everything will be okay. Stay soft, ride the wave. Newness, I'm not alone. Realignment with my purpose and divinity. Yeah, all right. Space, gentle and lighten the fuck up. Someone loved that. Strength and love, metamorphosis, new life. Yeah, all right. It's 10:30, we're gonna unmute everyone. And this is gonna be potentially cacophony, because who knows? We'll unmute everyone, and then we're gonna do 3 ohms, right?